Hello, and welcome back to Coach's Corner. It is a Tuesday, July 16th, in the dead heat of summer as we press on with the little news that we do have in the sports world. We keep on going. We try and fill out the sheet here. We have a great little show for you here, a college football kind of packed show because we are in SEC Media Days, but we have news outside of the SEC. We'll get to that with the historic program getting slammed and shunned by two giants. We have two programs that are going to make their debut during these media days in their new conference. But to start off things, we do have to talk about, like I often kind of start with, the things that are happening in the sports world, and that is baseball. Baseball was on full display last night with the home run derby, and I'll be honest, I told you what I was doing after the show yesterday, and that was playing the new college football video game. And I did that. I did that the entire night until Marcell Ozuna came up. Then he looked terrible in his first half until he took a timeout, and I turned it right back off. But from what I heard, it sounded like the home run derby was largely competitive and enjoyable if you ended up sticking through it. There was a very interesting anthem. There was losers like Pete Alonso that didn't make it to the finals. But in the end, we have a cool duel between Teoscar Hernandez and Bobby Witt Jr. And it's kind of cool because this goes back to a little bit of a point that I made in the last couple weeks where I was like, hey, baseball, they're doing the thing when they're kind of marketing their stars, their new and upcoming players a little bit more. And I think they did a good job of that with this home run derby they were kind of fortunate here with Bobby Witt Jr. making it to the finals. He's kind of one of the stars, up-and-coming stars in this game for the Royals specifically. And, for the most part, I think he delivered. And then, he wasn't the winner, however. Teoscar Hernandez ended up winning the home run derby. And it's kind of interesting to me because I felt like a lot of people weren't putting stock into what he has done this year because, Teoscar Hernandez is probably the fifth most notable Dodger this year. And, even name-wise, he's probably lower on that list, but still, Teoscar Hernandez, I feel like, has been a very crucial part of that team, especially with Mookie Betts down. He's been kind of a big part of their offense when Shohei Ohtani isn't doing things, when Freddie Freeman isn't doing things. He's been kind of key for them. And, winning the home run derby, maybe will bring a little bit more light to him and how good he has been this season. He is an all-star starter, so it's one of those, he's not flying that far under the radar, but it's just enough to where now people might recognize the name Teoscar Hernandez. And it was cool to see him win the home run derby, and I think he will be a crucial player coming up for the Dodgers in the playoffs, because as we know, I feel like the Dodgers, when they normally get to the playoffs, they're kind of hilarious because it feels like their stars, they're not bad, but the stars don't show up very much, and it's always a player that you don't expect, like a Max Muncy or a Chris Taylor, that always ends up stepping up for the Dodgers. Teoscar Hernandez feels like that kind of player where you don't really think about him and you're scared of what Shohei, Mookie, and Freddie will do to you, but then here's Teoscar Hernandez hitting the most crucial grand slam against your team in the playoffs. And so I think he'll be a key component for the Dodgers in this stretch run that they have. And if he keeps, hitting dingers like he was last night, I think the Dodgers could be in line for an NL pennant. But we obviously have seen them fall short of that, and we'll see if they end up making that jump to the NL pennant. So that's all I really have on the home run derby. Like I said, I wasn't a key participant in watching it and really being consumed by it. But from afar, that's just a couple things that I have. Now, on the other side of things, we have, media days happening in college football. Big 12 was last week. SEC is kind of taking over this week. Especially here in the South, it just means more. But there's a team that's pretty far down south here in Florida that has been making some noise here the past couple of years, but not on the field, not on the court, not on the diamond. And that is Florida State. Florida State has really been kind of shuffling their feet, just kind of wondering what do they do in the era of realignment. It's one of those things where basically all the major faces and brands of the leagues that are kind of dissolved. They went to the Big Ten, and then you had a couple from the Big 12 make the jump to the SEC, which is what teams have done before from the Big 12 to the SEC. And now we have a new team that is trying to force their way into that conversation, and that is Florida State. And it's interesting because Florida State was basically told, no, thank you. We don't want you joining our league. Not anytime soon, at least. We don't really want a part of that. And that was the Big Ten and the SEC not joining together, but both kind of saying, you can stay where you're at. And it's something that I think speaks volumes to how Florida State is perceived nowadays. The 90s Florida State probably gets a little bit more juice. They probably get a little bit more, hey, that's Florida State. They're pretty good. And I feel like this is just kind of an ACC problem as well, because there was a time where, the Miamis of the world, Clemson's a recent example. A lot of these teams in the ACC made noise, but now I feel like the conference is kind of being left to rot. And, eventually those teams will have to leave, and eventually they'll, buy their way out or do something where, I think Florida State's basically like saying like, hey, come save us. And the SEC and Big Ten are probably going to throw what's the circle thing? They're going to throw that out there to them and be like, hey, if you can swim to this, we'll help you, but you're on your own. It's one of those things where they're just kind of hoping that Florida State, will eventually come crawling and they won't have to pay enormous fees for Florida State to either join the conference or leave the ACC. I think that's kind of what's happening here, because I don't think Florida State's viewed as a brand that is that valuable, and kind of surprising because they've been good in basketball the past couple of years. They've been good in baseball the past couple of years. And football, they were really good last year. So it's interesting that I feel like teams don't really want Florida State in their conference, and especially the SEC, who has natural built rivalries with Florida's in there. And I'm sure if you just add certain teams, the rivalries will form there down the South. But teams just don't want Florida State, and I think it's just kind of an indictment on the ACC as a whole, where I think that conference has fallen off so hard, and they made that desperate move to add Cal and Stanford and SMU to try and keep this thing afloat and not fall victim to the realignment era. But if Florida State is getting denied, I think that's a pretty telling sign of where the ACC might be heading, where Florida State might be heading, and that is on a path to nowhere. So, it's one of those things where I'm just looking at the landscape here and noticing, I'm the noticer. I'm like, it's a very interesting thing that is happening to, I'd say, a pretty big brand in football and college athletics as a whole. So, hey, what do I know? And, speaking of that realignment thing, there are two programs that have successfully done it and are now gearing up for their first SEC Media Days. It's kind of like a first day of school for these teams, Texas and Oklahoma, getting ready to, really kind of take the stage in SEC Media Days. I think Oklahoma was today, later, basically after I was done watching SEC Media Days with Georgia. Oklahoma has, been a part of it. Texas is going to be a part of it. And frankly, I think it's going to be a very fun season to see how these two programs do, because, although I think the SEC's happy that they, added these two teams, these two programs to their conference, I don't think there will be any love lost. I think there will be some good rivalries that come out of it. Maybe we'll get the revitalization of Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and Mizzou, their old Big 12 rivals, Big 10, whatever it was. We're going to get some juice here. I think Oklahoma, I think, has an underrated chance to really be a thorn in the side of certain teams. They feel like, they're not going to be a national powerhouse out the gate. They've been rebuilding ever since Lincoln Riley left. But I think they'll be an interesting tier 2 type of program where they'll be really kind of more annoying than, good to teams like Auburn, to LSU's, the Floridas. They'll be just good enough to where they can either, cause problems for those teams that want to get to the Georgia, Alabama level. They're fighting to get to that level as well. But I think, starting out, I think there'll be an interesting wild card in the SEC where we'll see how they do. I'm interested. I'm more interested to see how they do than Texas because I feel like we know what Texas is. They're an offensive first team led by Steve Sarkisian that recruits well on defense, and they normally have some good players there. But they're mainly offensive led. Where Oklahoma really does feel like they've been rebuilding this entire thing since Lincoln Riley left. They were kind of that same offensive heavy team, but now they have a little bit different of a tone with them with Brett Venables, maybe more of a well-rounded situation where, I think they could be a more consistent contender in the SEC than Texas. And that feels crazy to say, but we've seen how, Texas, the pressure can really, be on and can kind of really pressure down on these players and coaches where they go through lull periods and they end up firing a coach too early and this, that, and the other. Then Oklahoma just kind of steadily is around 8-9 wins. Sometimes they're up there with college football playoff discussions. It's one of those things. I'm interested to see how they do in the SEC, but I'm curious to see what the adjustment period will look like. I'm curious to see the adjustment period for any of these teams that are entering new conferences. How quickly does SMU, jump on the scene? Do the Big Ten, do those Pac-12 schools, Oregon, Washington, USC, do they hit the ground running? I don't know. Big 12, where you're kind of backtracking to their realignment, where they, united BYU, Houston, Cincinnati. Do those teams look more competitive in the Big 12 in year two? I don't know. These are just all these interesting questions that I think we'll have answered in college football this season, and I can't wait. If you can't tell, I am jazzed about some college football. But moving on to pro football, we had a trade request happen, a big-time receiver on the trade market who was kind of quietly just out there on the trade market, but it's official now. Brandon Ayuk officially makes his trade request to get out of San Francisco. And I don't think this is really new news because, frankly, Brandon Ayuk has been very open about not wanting to be a part of this 49ers team unless they pay him. And then the 49ers responded basically by drafting a receiver in the first round and Ricky Pearsall, who I like. It's just a very quick moving of the motions here where now it's official. Brandon Ayuk does want out, and he was so heavily hinting at going to Washington. That feels too on the nose because, his former teammate, Jane Daniels, is now the quarterback there, so obviously he wants to reunite there. But, you got to look at other teams that do need receivers. Like, I think the Patriots stand out as a guy or a contending team. Not a contending team, but a contender to trade try and improve that receiver room, which they haven't done in years. I look at the Falcons, are a team that I feel like can just genuinely use a good receiver. Just, I like Drake London, and, he's a good player. But having Brandon Ayuk and Drake London, I feel like is a good combination there. There's just multiple teams that could use, I think, a receiver to boost themselves. If the Bills could afford him, I feel like that'd be great for them. Just to get another receiver in there that is experienced, and they lost both of their guys this year, but I don't think they can afford them. So Brandon Ayuk is on the market. We'll see what happens with him, what develops, how quickly it develops. But you have to think about the team that trades for him will have to extend him because he is under a franchise tag, I believe, or his fifth-year option. Either way, Brandon Ayuk will have to basically be extended. So you're trading for and going to pay this guy pretty immediately. And I don't know how many teams would like to do that for Brandon Ayuk. Like I said, good player. I like him. But for a guy who's, I don't think ever been truly the number one, you could argue that he was the best receiver for the Niners last year because Debo was a little banged up. But all in all, I don't know if we've seen him as the number one guy. And it's kind of like similar to the Gabe Davis thing now, where we're going to see Gabe Davis as the number one in Jacksonville because they don't have Ridley, and I don't think Christian Kirk is really a true number one. Will he step up and be that guy that you can rely on for 10, 12 targets a game? I don't know. I like Brandon Ayuk, but I don't know. So that's really all the news that I do have for you on this Tuesday afternoon. with all that being said, I will see you guys tomorrow with hopefully some good stuff to talk about. Hopefully, we get some good news over the night, and we'll see what the All-Star game brings us tonight as Paul Skeens is on the bump. So, with all that being said, I'm your host, Lucas Kojevar, as always. Like, share, subscribe to the pod, YouTube channel, all that good stuff. I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.